Welcome back to the Gen 20 podcast.
And I'm Marina.
I'm Nicole.
Today we're talking about 6 books worth reading in your 20s. As you know, Nicole and I are both huge readers, and now that we're not in our 20s anymore, we've had some time to think about which books we read then that helped and which books we've read recently that we wish we had read then. So our first book we've talked about a lot on the podcast and on the website. It's The Defining Decade by Dr. Meg Jay. We even interviewed her and had a really thoughtful conversation about our 20s and why this decade matters and isn't a throwaway one. So I remember reading it in my 20s before we ever came into contact with Dr. J. And then I reread it at 29 and remember thinking, wow, I wish I had read this more than once throughout my 20s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a really good book. I definitely read it, I think around the time I started Gen 20, around 2013, 2014. I don't remember the exact year it came out, but it was sometime around then. And the biggest concept in there that I was really inspired by is called identity capital. And I see that as like an investment in yourself. That's what I've kind of started calling self-development is self-investment. You probably see that like kind of different places around the website and our emails and things like that. But I think building identity capital is kind of about like how you do the things that you do and like what you do and how you spend your time. I hope that makes sense. I'll link to a couple blog posts that we've done that talk about ways to build identity capital, but I almost see it as like all the experiences that you have, all of the like programs you've done, learning you've done, the ways like you spend your time and invest in yourself. I think that like the concept of that was just really inspiring to me in my early 20s, and I still find it really fascinating as well. Now I'm a 30-something, but yeah, I think it's worth reading, especially just for that point.
Yeah,
What about
the
you?
identity capital was one that I really appreciated revisiting when I was 29 because I think for so long I didn't, it was hard to spend money on myself when it came to self-development because I just felt like, oh, I don't have enough money to incorporate this in my routine or whatever. But you don't have, like, identity capital is not something you have to pay for. For me, the big takeaway was that, you know, you're not too late, right? Our 20s, that decade is so important because we're figuring out how to be an adult, who we are, and that's really valuable. And we have to do it. We can't just wait until we wake up and know who we are because that's not how it works. So the more you can experience and explore and learn in your 20s, the happier you'll be. So I loved that because for so long I felt like, oh, I'm not where I thought I'd be when I was 30, so I've missed it. It's like, no, but if I look back, I have all these experiences that brought me to where I am now, and I'm pretty happy where I am now. So definitely read The Defining Decade.
Yeah. Okay, so the next book I'm going to jump to is called What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, and it's by the novelist Haruki Murakami. And he talks a lot about running, as you might expect. So if you're not a runner or never have been, those parts might feel a little glossy to you. You'll just gloss right over them. But I think that it's a really short read. It's like a very small book. But to me, I listened to it, I read it back in like 2016, 2015, somewhere around there. And then I listened to it again this week, actually. And the biggest takeaway for that book for me is to dedicate yourself to something that you love and make it part of your daily life. Like, I think it's so important to commit yourself to something and to work towards something and to have goals. And even if they don't mean anything to anyone else, like his goal for running marathons and things like that is that to never walk. And in the book he says, and like on my gravestone they're going to put, at least he never walked. And I thought that was so funny, and just, I don't know, I thought it was a real commitment to a goal he had that matters nothing to anyone else. And I think it's really important that we have goals like that in the way we dedicate ourselves to things that we do. And I mean, for running, I've run a half marathon before. It's actually been like 9 years since I've done that, which is an incredibly long, crazy time. But I always really loved running, and I'm hoping to get back more into it this year. But I also, in my mind, I also dedicate myself a lot to reading. Like, it's really important for me to be well read and to read lots of things. And that's just something that I have committed myself to like through my 20s and hopefully I will for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I don't have much to say about this book because I have not read it. But from what Nicole told me about before
Mhm.
we started recording, I would say it's a good reminder that you're allowed to have hobbies that aren't monetized. You're allowed to have interests that are just because you're
Mhm.
interested in them. And you're allowed to work at things that may not, like, quote unquote, pay off in any tangible form other than you enjoy time spending doing that. I know for myself, because
Mhm.
I'm multi passionate, very creative, like to learn things, almost every hobby I've started has
Mhm.
that like I've had a moment where I think, should I start a business doing this? Should I sell this?
Oh yeah, I think that's
And
super
it's,
common.
yeah, I think it's very common for our age group and also just, in this economy. But I've had to actively think about my hobbies this year, and one of them is cooking because girls got to eat. I'm going to eat
Mm.
every day. But I find that the time I spend like unplugged, just chopping vegetables, thinking about how to season them and how they're going to pair with the other textures of whatever I'm making is really meditative. And I don't know what they'll
Mhm.
put on my gravestone, but at least I can cook.
Her vegetables meshed well
vegetables,
together.
vegetables mesh well.
Something like that.
The next book we want to talk about is Dare to Lead by Brene Brown. I actually just listened to this on audio. I'm 31, so I thought a lot about how I wish I had read it when I was in my 20s, especially when I was working in a corporate environment,
Mhm.
because my last big corporate job, well, we've talked about it, but my experience in the corporate world has always been kind of not great. And a lot of it has had to do with leadership. And in listening to Brene Brown's book, Dare to Lead, she talked a lot about how she approaches conflict and support. And I wish I had known how to ask for more help, or I wish I had known how to communicate this isn't working when I
Mhm.
was 22 or 23, especially because it's a trait that, while helpful in your workplace, is something we can learn for our personal relationships. Recently, I had a family
Mhm.
event and there was some drama going on, and I just looked at the person and said, "What does support look like for you from me? How can I help you?" And they just were like, "Wow, okay. Can you just sit with me while I compose this answer because I don't want anyone else to come up to me and start talking because I'm trying to send this email?" It's like, yeah, I could totally do that.
Mhm.
But I would never have thought to ask it that way.
Mhm.
I would normally just be like, well, let me fix it for you. Everything's going to be okay, which is, there's a time and place for that. But
Mhm.
leadership looks a lot different than it used to. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. I actually have not read that book, but I really like the way you phrase that. So maybe that'll be my next
It's a great
audiobook.
audiobook. Brene Brown has a good
I
voice.
think it's been a while since I've read anything by her. So maybe it's time to pick something
This
back
is my
up
first
because
read.
I think conflict resolution is important.
Sorry,
Oh,
I didn't mean to cut
really?
you off. I've
Wow.
listened to her
No, no,
podcast and
you're
I
good.
I read articles by her, but this was my first Brene Brown book. So I'm going to
Mhm.
dive more into her
Wow.
too.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Okay, so pivoting to our third book, we will talk about our friend Michelle Douglas's Don't Wear Shoes You Can't Walk In book. We interviewed her on the podcast last season, and it was really awesome. Uh, she basically wrote this book from her journal entries. Like at one point in her life, I believe she had just started writing down something she learned every day in her journal as like part of her journaling practice. And that's eventually what became her book. And it's just like all of these uh, lessons from her 20s. And it's like, I think it's a pretty quick, easily digestible read, but it's just something like there's some things that just hang with you in the back of your mind. And I don't know. I really liked her
I
book. What do you
loved it.
think?
I also really loved the conversation we had with her on our podcast. So, like, go listen. But
Mhm.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
just such a good reminder that we can constantly be learning from ourselves and our experiences, no matter how young or old we are. And it's genuinely good
Mhm.
advice because if you're wearing shoes you can't walk in, you're just going to have a real bad day. metaphorically and literally.
Mhm.
So we
Mhm.
we're
Yeah,
big
no, I
Michelle
feel you.
Douglas fans, and so we can't recommend her book enough.
Mhm.
Then
Alright. So, the next
yeah,
oh, you wanna go
I'll
or you want me to
announce
go?
this one. So the next book is book number 5
Okay.
on our list. It's called Attached. It's by Amir Levine and Rachel S.F. Heller. It's about attachment theory, and I read this uh, pretty recently, probably a year ago. No, not that long ago. Doesn't matter. I read it
Mhm.
recently in my 30s, but through the recommendation of a therapist, and it's all about how the way you related to your caregivers when you're a child forms how you relate to people romantically or otherwise as adults. And so I found it really interesting to think about
Mhm.
because I didn't know, like, my attachment style is not secure, which is the, you're looking for a secure attachment, which that just means you are feeling confident in who you are and how the people around you perceive you, and you're not worried that they're going to leave you or abuse you. So I don't have that attachment
Mhm.
style. I'm actively working on building it. But I didn't know that other people didn't think the way I thought. And it just opened my eyes when it came to dating. And I could look back on the last 2 or 3 relationships and realize, like, oh, that's where it went wrong. So I think because
Mm.
in our 20s, we're meeting so many people, we're often dating for the whole decade. It's worth to read because you deserve to be with someone who makes you feel safe, and you deserve to be able to communicate your needs, whether it's in a romantic relationship or in a
Mhm.
friendship or even at work. So I loved this book and I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that actually because again, I have not read this one, but as a my degree is in psychology, so this is something I'm quite familiar with and it's interesting to me because it's just not something I would have thought of that you didn't know about. I don't know. I feel like to me it's like I've been learning about these things for like
Yeah, I
decades.
did not know.
And it's fascinating, but yeah, I should read that and like rebrush
Yeah,
up on
thanks
it.
to reading it, I now, anytime I think, wow, this person hates me and they're going to leave me, I remind myself that's not a true fact because of this book, which is
Mhm.
helpful. Which is
Yeah.
helpful.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So the last book on our list is my contribution, and it's called Better Than Before by Gretchen Rubin, and it's about habits. And I like reading
Mhm.
books about habits. Like I like habits. I like learning how they're formed, why we do what we do, all that kind of stuff. But this is one book that always sticks out in my head about like just forming habits, like even more so than other books like Atomic Habits. I read that recently and I personally don't think it's like
Oh,
worth
hot take because it's been on my
reading.
to read list.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, like, some good takeaways in there, but, like, honestly, it's not
Mm,
anything you don't already know. I mean, I guess maybe it is, but to me, I was just like, this is just very, like, top
mhm.
level basic habit stuff that, like, isn't it's not life changing to me. Whereas when I read Better Than Before, I was like, wow, these are some, like, really hot methods that I never thought about before. And I'll link the blog post that I wrote about it in the show notes. But, like, for example, one rule that she talks about, because like, very I think habit rules are very effective, because, like, for me, for example, we don't keep a lot of sweets in our house because our rule is that we get dessert out. And whether that means, like, we go out for ice cream as a family or we just order dessert at restaurants, like, we don't pack our house with, like, chocolate and sugar and candy and sweets and stuff, which, like, because if we have that here, we'll just eat them.
It's true.
Like, we don't have
I
a
don't
moderation
yeah,
level, like,
I don't
we
keep
just
things in
eat
the
them.
house except dark chocolate because I can't be
Yeah, so,
tamed.
like, that's our rule, right? Yeah, and, I mean, I'm the same way, so I don't know, just, like, when you kinda, like, reframe things like that, like, rules in your life, I think it just makes, like, way more sense, like, when I want a soda, like, I will drink a soda sometimes, but I only drink soda
Mm,
out. That's, like I don't buy it to have at my house, like, I don't get it at, like, a gas station or something, it's, like, a restaurant or
interesting,
something
yeah.
like that, like, in only very like specific circumstances. Because otherwise, like if you don't have these rules in your life, even if they don't make sense to other people, they should make sense for you, your habits, and your goals. And if they don't, then like make sense to other people, like that's fine. But I think that the only way, like this book just made me think that the only way I was going to reach my goals was by setting like my habits for myself. And that another thing she talks about, for example, is like abstinence is a more effective habit former than moderation. And that's like, I think that's true for so many people where they try to like let themselves do things sometimes, where in reality, while you're trying to form a habit, it's like better just not to do that
That's
thing.
so interesting. As you were speaking, I thought, what rules do I
Hmm.
have? And I was like, oh, it's just like hellfire over here. I have no rules. Oh, I want this. Great.
Yeah.
Oh, I should do this. Great. Um, one of the habits
Hmm.
I've been trying to change for probably the last 5 years, like definitely the last year, is scrolling on my
Hmm.
phone because it's,
That's immediately what I thought about when you said
and
I
you're
had
like,
this
Marina,
thought.
she's a scroller. She's a scroller. But I've started, um, I'll let myself scroll, but I give myself a timer like on my phone where I'm like, all right,
Mm.
this is going to
Yeah, that's
interrupt
your
me.
rule. That's your
And then
rule.
I have to read
Mhm.
before, like I have to like, if I want to scroll, I have to put my phone down and read first. And then a lot of times I don't
Mhm.
want to scroll because I'm like, oh, this book is good.
Mhm.
I want to keep reading. And then it's like time to go to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's yeah. Yeah, it's like this I mean, this is kinda getting a little bit off topic, but there's like, this idea of like I think it's called like dopamine dominance. I have to refresh up on it. But it's like whenever you're picking up your phone, you're
Mm-hmm.
getting this like hit of dopamine. You're like, oh my gosh, this is so exciting. But like when you think about it, like when I'm away from my phone, I do not miss it. Like we went on a family vacation recently and I was barely on my phone. So much so that some people texted me to ask me if I was
I was not
okay.
one of those people.
And I was like,
Sorry.
yeah, I'm fine. I'm just no,
Well, I
fine.
knew
You
you
were
were on
busy.
vacation.
Literally living my best life. Like, yeah, I knew you were doing stuff too. So I was like, no, she's fine. Someone will reach out to me otherwise if she's not fine. But like, I don't know. It's just I think when you're away from it, you just forget how enticing it is because I mean, social media and all of these things, like they are made to
Mhm.
keep you scrolling. They want you to be on their apps because they want you to buy things. They're making money from you
Yeah.
being on there. And like, I mean, I get it, but at the same time, like protect
Protect
your peace,
your
people. You have
peace.
to do that.
That is a good rule for your
Yeah.
20s that I am just coming into now, but it's a good one.
Mm. Yeah. Like just tell yourself this is not worth it for me and walk away. You
Yeah.
don't have to be part of it.
So these are our 6 books that we think you should read in your 20s. If you're already out of your 20s,
Mhm.
they're still worth reading. And if you're in your 20s and feeling any kind of way that's not positive, just know that you're going to be okay. You're going to get through it. And you're going to look back and
Mhm.
realize
Mhm.
you have done more than you realized. You are smarter than you thought. You're more resilient than you thought. And you're pretty, pretty great.
Yes, you are.
This has been another episode of the Gen 20 podcast. We'd love for you to rate and review. Please subscribe as well. And we'll see you next time. Bye.